What's going on, guys? It's Frito here for your Overwatch. A brand new patch just went through today to buff Mauga yet again. And after grinding Season 8 these past couple weeks, we've got for you a detailed tier list and guide on the new interactions. The patch for Season 8 really buffed up the tanks to a significant degree, where now I would say DPS are clearing away the most frustrating role to play now. Tanks are a lot stronger in their own right, but also have a lot of new interesting interactions that makes them counter things that used to counter them. Yeah, kind of crazy. They really shook it up this time. The new hero Mauga, they've really been trying to balance him quickly so that he lands in competitive in a good spot. On the launch release, they overbuffed him, it seemed, tightening his spread. Overrun could no longer be hacked. Then he was pretty insane. But I want us to note a very important number for me personally, where the damage per shot originally was 4.5, went up to 5, but due to the other improvements they gave him, they dropped that down to 4 a few days ago. More buffs come through today to compensate yet again, but they're pushing him more towards a brawler as opposed to having severe damage, which is what I thought made him so good. Now, the newest buff is that his base health is transferred to 100 more armor than before, so 250 of his health is armor. That's really important. That's going to help him frontline as well as poke, which seems to be what they're trying to change him to be able to do better. They went ahead and reverted that incendiary chain gun change, which made the enemies ignite slower. Now it's back to 10 shots, which I think is good, but the spread on it has decreased from 1.1 to 1 when only one chain gun is active. That's really key. That will make Mauga more effective at longer ranges, shooting just one chain gun at a time. And especially with his improved armor health, characters poking back at him will have a harder time whittling him down. Then his passive, Berserker, which gives him overshield health whenever he hits a crit, and you get auto crits when firing on burning targets. That conversion has now increased by 10% from 50 to 60. That's today's patch notes. We'll have a much longer, in-depth breakdown after this quick message. Today's video is brought to you by Manscaped.com. Today we're looking at the Performance Package 5.0 Ultra, featuring the Lawnmower 5.0 Ultra Electric Trimmer, which now has 2 blade heads, an upgraded trimmer blade, and an interchangeable foil blade for enhanced performance. The upgraded trimmer blade has longer, wider, and rounded teeth that makes it tough on hair but light on skin thanks to its skin-safe technology. The game changer is the foil blade, which will get you that very close shave to leave you feeling smooth. This makes the Lawnmower 5.0 2 trimmers in one. They also upgraded the flashlight with a bigger LED and a dual temperature setting. The 5.0 has all the great features from before: travel lock, charges with USB-C, and it's waterproof so you can use it in the shower. Here we got the Weed Whacker 2.0. Skin-safe technology makes those nose and ear hairs a breeze to remove. Waterproof, cordless, and USB-C to charge. Also included is the Crop Soother and Crop Preserver. The Crop Soother has shea and cocoa seed butter, which provides essential moisture after shave. And the Crop Preserver Ball Deodorant is a meta counterpick to odor. But that's not all. The Performance Package 5.0 comes with 2 free gifts: the luxuriously comfortable Manscaped Boxers 2.0 and the new Shed 2.0 to carry everything. You gotta get the new and improved Performance Package 5.0, either for yourself or as a gift for a friend. Head on over to manscaped.com and use our promo code Overwatch at checkout to get 20% off your entire order plus free international shipping. That's manscaped.com. Use promo code Overwatch to get 20% off and free international shipping. Mauga has been a hard hero to track because his balancing has been all over the place, and as well, opinions on his power level and potential have also been all over the place. I've heard every option available from players of all skill tiers, and no one seems to be able to agree, and then on top of that, they keep changing the personality of his kit. The key takeaway for me is that although on launch they increased his ammo capacity, they eventually lowered his damage. So although he's got a tighter spread and is a little more reliable, the insane time to kill he could get at like extreme close range is just sort of gone entirely now, making him more moderate and reliable, but a bit less threatening. Especially as they push him more to be about him shooting at range, I think that's not going to be an area that Mauga is going to feel highly competitive in, because it's not something I think you need your tank to do. And especially as they upgrade a lot of the other tanks, Mauga is not going to be one of the heavy hitters in my tier list here today, because I'm really struggling to put my finger on what he's actually really exceptionally good at. Like, what does he counter? Because other tanks have sharp enough playstyles that with their skill expression can take over the game or counter something else. The best candidate is the slow and shieldless Roadhog, where Mauga's somewhat infinite sustain can outlast even the tankiest of self-sustained tanks in Roadhog. A major upside is that Kiriko did get buffed and is seeing more widespread play, which will help Mauga, but otherwise my advice on the new hero in ranked right now is proceed with caution. Defensive tank should have the best matchup against him if you're trying to isolate him. Sigma has 2 forms of damage denial, and D.Va of course has a lot of defense matrix to work with. What I'll do here in this clip as D.Va is try to hold my defense matrix longer, play more passive, let them make the first move, and be ready to fly and eat if an engage comes in on one of my squishy teammates, or try to save Matrix until he uses his cardiac overdrive, which you'll know because he'll be glowing yellow. Eating up his damage when he's expecting to be able to lifesteal is effectively like casting Anti-Nade on him, or another version of it. With more armor now, he can hold his position and brawl longer than he did before, and he's slightly more of a threat at range, but the damage numbers are so low and slow that even if your aim is insane, I think you'd prefer to have the ease of use of another tank or a higher burst potential output. I think you can play faster and more aggressive towards his team, especially vertically. Healing as Mauga is okay, because you can slam a target and give your team lifesteal, but there's just better forms of doing that, particularly better CC, and Anti-Nade exists. Oh, and giving your teammate lifesteal requires them to hit shots. So likely they'll need to be on a type of reliable hit character, because there's a bunch of characters that if they whiff their next clutch shot or two, they're not really gaining any benefit at all, as opposed to, let's say, shielding them, matrixing them, bubbling them as another tank. Okay, now on to the tier list proper. At the tippity top of the tank tier list, I'm gonna put Winston, because he got an insane buff where his Tesla cannon now pierces through armor. Let's remember, I make my tier lists for the bottom, like 97% of players is my goal. The characters I think you'll be able to rank up the easiest on, and why. I think what the change does more so is give Winston counterplay options to things that used to be able to very easily swap to hard counter Winston. The personality of Winston for most players was, if you start doing well, then D.Va, Bastion, Brig all come out at the same time and you have to swap. Now Winston, especially since they kept buffing the range on his alternate fire, has a massive potential to create openings against these fortified targets. This is adding a lot of movement to the game. Remember, there's a few things you can do with the charge shot. You can get vertical on your opponent, maybe even sneak in that body shot beam on the Brigitte, getting an angle past her shield, and that's her entire armor health pool gone, makes her easy to dive. And as you're jockeying and staging for space, you can even start to whittle down the enemy Bastion before you dive. And yes, after practice and thought, I do think you can pretty effectively dive a Bastion as Winston now, especially if you have help from another Bastion counter like Genji. Because a lot of these characters with the properties of armor, which is 30% damage reduction while you're in your armor health, having a character that can snipe away that, it would be like applying Discord to them in a way, by removing that defensive passive they normally have. And there's more characters too where it really matters on. Torbjorn has natural armor, for example, and while I don't think it makes Winston oppressive versus tanks because their damage on him is usually always higher, it makes him effectively playable against them, which is not something he could have said multiple seasons ago. So if you're starting to gain a small advantage, you can kind of brawl the enemy tank and force them out, or more importantly, as kills start to get traded out, more often than not, Winston can stay in, whereas in the past, if the last couple targets left maybe is the D.Va or the Orisa and they have health, you're almost terrified of taking that fight. But now you're like an asset to the team to keep the gas pedal down and continue to brawl it up. Ignoring armor is just a massive, massive tool which rewrites the game in a big way. Previously, I would have said perhaps even one counter pick may have been enough to deter you to swap off of Winston. Now I think the enemy will have to pick multiple for you to really feel you have to swap. Now, with all that being said, the tank role still is fairly rock, paper, scissors, but more of the game is more obviously now, which I think will make more sense when we look at the damage category, which is the one that's kind of pulling the short straw now. While this tier list might look boring because I'm just putting most of the tanks in the same tier, I did meticulously place them them. One that may surprise you is Ramattra, and that's because I highly rate the buffs that he got. Having natural armor on his mage form and higher damage on his staff makes him more effective at range poke than before. Without armor, it felt like a sniper could poke down his head so quickly that you'd be afraid of poking at range at all, especially since your shield is on a short timer. That really limited him to be more just about his rush playstyle in Nemesis form. Well, you still got that, but you're far more effective at pressing forward, holding more space, and poking and controlling than before. Higher damage number means you'll farm ult faster, and there's an interesting ripple effect once an entire category of characters gets buffed together. A lot of tank buffs have come through, a lot of tank options exist on the table, so it's much harder for the enemy to know for sure they can easily counter you. And while there are counters to Ram, he's pretty reliable. Not the sharpest of playstyles, but feeling like you don't have to force swap because the enemy pulled out 1 or 2 counter picks is a new thing for the tank category, and Ram benefits from that as well. Not as much burst impact as some of the other tanks, which you may miss, but his new buffs make him much more playable and effective against a lot of the matchups in the game. And for my money, he simply just has a better ranged and punished playstyle ahead of what I think they're trying to go for with Mauga. Despite nerfs to Sig, I still put him and Zarya quite high on the tier list because they are good, stand in the front, durable tanks that have defenses against a lot of things that otherwise could roll you as a tank. Sig better against hit scans and higher volumes of damage. Zarya cleanse helps against disables and ultimates. Very playable ranked characters, but can get caught out by mobility characters such as Winston, so you'll have to be more careful with your positioning. Doom and Queen both got small changes. The Doom one ultimately I think is a nerf, but his cooldown cycle I think was more reliable than Queen, so he maintains in the middle of the pack of the A tier. Queen can truly hard carry games, and Shout is an underrated defensive option for the team, but the skill required and the possibilities of counters are a little bit too harsh for me to put her higher on the tier list. I'm ranking Reinhardt higher again, despite him getting no changes. Since the severity of the anti-tank kit in the game is less prevalent, it's less likely you'll see it even against Rein. That's kind of how the cascading counter-pick metagame works, right? Like if they know you're going to easily swap to something that makes them useless, they're less likely to go Bastion against Rein, for example. They just completely zone you out. Roadhog and D.Va are two ends of the spectrum for me. D.Va's a bit of an unsung hero in my opinion. She has the best defense in the entire role, being able to eat lots of damage and ultimates. It can just be a little tricky for her to take over the game like other tanks can. Roadhog, of course, is the opposite. Completely self-sufficient, and while there's one magical cooldown that can disrupt his ability to sustain if you outplay it or cleanse it, Roadhog's self-tankiness and 2 forms of crowd control in the neutral fight, and then a third one with his ult, Hog can certainly be a no button to over-aggressive enemies, and I think has some of the easiest tank damage to land due to how consistent they made his kit. Queen's is pretty high, and maybe Mauga now too, but he's my go-to. Otherwise, I would suggest Doomfist if you feel you need to take over getting picks for the team. Especially keep that damage point in mind when we look at the support category, because it is very diverse what to expect your team comp to be able to do based on the support picks you have. If you have just high healing, you need your characters to have high damage to be able to finish a target. Into the B tier now, we've got Wrecking Ball, Mauga, and Orisa, who I think are all situational. Now, I don't actually think any of the tanks are straight up bad, but after Sombra's been buffed a bit, I think I start rating Ball even lower, especially since now we have more and more other tank options that might be better. I think Mauga perhaps might just be straight up better than Ball, perhaps even able to go at the backline in a different way if he chose to, and I don't even rate that very highly. I think Mauga needs the right matchup to be any good, as we spoke about in the intro, and Orisa, I would consider if your team needed more peel, or if you wanted to have a better option to survive anti-nade. Otherwise, she's like worse Roadhog, and I find her more effective if you're, say, like playing with a Cass, the type of character that needs peel and maybe having crowd control stacks will be more effective, whereas Hog is like a one-man wrecking crew when it comes to stuns, getting his own kills oftentimes. Orisa's like a better tanking teammate, playing a position in front of the team. Hog can choose to kind of flank off to the side more, and you wouldn't want your Orisa doing that. She drops in the tier list, remember, because Winston can shoot through her armor later on in the fight, which actually matters because that feels like another beam type damage, like when Zarya can damage through her spinny spear. Winston's damage is lower, but he can do that too. Weak against Sigma, Ram got buffed and kind of has a similar playstyle, but more range and mobility overall. And a really important important distinction, Orisa doesn't really counter Roadhog anymore. In the past, because you could stun, take a breather, and remove that cooldown, you just robbed him of all of his sustain. Meanwhile, you're crowd controlling him and shooting him forever. Well, now it's a bit different. You'll still crowd control him, but he can absorb endless poke from you, build up to his ultimate, and whole hog rolls Orisa. It always has, frankly, but it was because she lost that other interaction that now I think she's kind of even against him. You'll have to work more to outplay him, and it's not as easy as before. Now onto the important support category. We're leaving Ana in S tier. I think she is now the remaining top support in the game because I think there's two major play styles that you're going to find the easiest to execute. The biggest impact one is when Ana has positioning, the enemy struggle to find her or get on top of her, and her abilities are the strongest single impact that support has. Other supports have a more moderate approach to the role where they're sustainable, they can get away, they can heal a lot. Ana heals a lot and has burst impact. Her only problem is getting into position. Lifeweaver can babysit her, Brig can protect her, Lucio can peel her out, and now that more tanks are seeing play, Nano Boost is just incredibly flexible. Whether you've got a DPS to put it on, or now that Winston I rate so highly, Ramattra I rate highly, but is it bad on Queen, Ram, any of these other tanks that are quite playable, brawly? At the moment, I am pretty sure Nano's the best supportal, and I don't think it's very close. Because even though they buffed the interaction for Kiriko to cleanse anti more effectively, that was a few patches ago, but then they buffed cleanse even more in the recent patch, Ana still has a lot going for her kit. And the biggest tip for you Ana players is to remember that Kiriko gets an added healing buff when she cleanses a status effect. So that means after the healing buff they gave Suzu, it can now heal 110 max in an AoE, potentially. So don't launch your nades across the map expecting that to be a benefit to the team. You're just feeding value to the Kiriko at that point. But it's certainly hard to cleanse every anti perfectly, especially if you let the play develop a bit. There's lots of other reasons Kiriko might feel the need to use the Suzu, and it's waiting till after that where you'll see the biggest benefit. But Ana is weak to the next prominent playstyle that has emerged. Moira, Kiriko, and Lucio all play in the swarmy Winston style dive comp. Moira is freaking nuts right now with how much mobility there is. She already had been farming ranked for quite a long time, but was kind of power checked by the supports that could headshot. But you don't need to do that, especially when you're up against a character like Ana who mostly has single target healing. The easiest tip in the world is to sink a damage orb onto their backline as your teammates dive in. Not before, just to build ult. That usually doesn't do much. But in this way, Moira is an obnoxious dive character, and this playstyle is countered by the more defensible supports that heal more or run away easier. But Moira is going to be your go-to pick when playing with an aggressive tank that goes deep at the enemy backline. Lucio and Kiriko are other options to keep up with them. And let's not forget that earlier stages of the game, these two were hard meta. And for my money, as the mobility has re-emerged as a bigger option, all of a sudden the more static playstyle that was good in the turret meta a while back, kind of getting run over. Or at the very least going to require much stronger positioning and peel from the team to not have these flank, swarm, or dive style characters to easily surround you. That all being said, I still have Baptiste in the A tier because he is overall the best when it comes to fortifying a slower playstyle. Lamp still good for defending, especially against tank ults, I'd say. And he has the stats to fight off a lot of duels himself, but can only handle so many targets swarming around at once. In the B tier, we got Brig, Zen, Lifeweaver, and Illari as the, quote, worst support in the game, I guess. Keep in mind, the tier list doesn't really have any bad characters in it. I think the game's pretty balanced. All these characters are good and playable. I just think the B tier picks are going to require a better matchup for you to feel confident that they're the best pick for the situation. You'll have to play Brig better to outplay Winston. Zen is a very sharp, harsh counter pick that if the enemy struggle to get on you, that Discord orb can still carry, but the maps are quite fluid and mobile in nature, so I think that's a little tricky. Mercy and Lifeweaver are incredibly reliable, have some amazing synergies, but require on teammates to be able to make use of that. So keep that in mind. Outrageous potential value, but sometimes you'll feel like you want more power in your own hands. And Illari, I just think the game doesn't suit her so well. If you're not picking off squishies, I find that her damage often just gets healed away. And I feel like I see her with like 7,000 damage, 7,000 healing, and not much of limbs, implying she sort of just holds her position, pokes, and doesn't do a lot. I think over time, players have learned how to outplay her ultimate as well. There's a lot of characters that kind of don't mind jumping up in the sky and fighting her as she thinks she's flying. At one time at release, it felt like it was super oppressive, but it's actually not that hard to get away from, eat, or reflect. If you've got top 500 level hit scan aim, then yeah, Illari's gonna pub stomp you all the way through the game. But I think she just takes too much skill to play right now and probably prefers your team comp to be on full poke. And when teams typically like to play more brawly and aggressive, it's hard to get them restrained enough to be patient enough to just hold a spot while you try to go for your Widowmaker of support levels of headshot picks. Most ranked players aren't that patient where they're just gonna hold an angle with you while you poke and poke and poke forever, which I think is what she needs to do. Meanwhile, she kind of just doesn't really help anybody. Barely any support on the tank. Tricky to sync up with a lot of the damage that are getting played now. So like, what does she do? I would drop her lower, but her skill ceiling if you hit your headshots and win duels is so high that I won't. But there was a point where Kiriko seemed useless compared to Illari in the turret meta, and I think that's just flip-flopped, where Kiriko's been buffed so much, and she's so playable in that she can sync up with a lot of different styles, and Illari kind of just has one, that I advise you proceed with caution on that one. Onto the damage category. Damage is a rough roll right now. The tanks in this patch have got their power creep pass, so a lot of them are taking over the game. So meanwhile, a lot of the easy answers out of the damage category have dropped down in potential. Damage right now is very nuanced, and you have to find your counter pick matchups, whether it's on the enemy tank, on the enemy's DPS. Counter picking is incredibly important for damage players, unless you're just so skilled that you can hit shots on anything. So that being said, that's what this A tier is. It's less the power of them individually, but just more the playability of what they can counter. I don't actually think Soldier's the best DPS. I just leave him at the top because the role of hit scan is so reliable in the game. And he's the one that can peel for himself. He did get his heal station nerfed with a longer cooldown now, but Flexible Hero plays his own position. Sojourn is similar since she has such a powerful escape, certainly a higher ceiling. And as there's more of a tank battle going on now, tanks are a lot stronger, farming rails off the tank than punishing squishies. Getting pickoffs as a DPS character can be kind of difficult now because the tanks are taking up more space, and Sojourn can fit in that playstyle. The rest of the A tier is just flex DPS galore. They all go at different things, help different things. Perhaps one of the more surprising picks high on the list is Reaper, and that's because a lot of the anti-tank picks have changed yet again, and Reaper can hold his position and really mold the tank fight, and has a pretty strong matchup against Mei, who also can do the same. Despite the Tracer buffs, I still think Genji is the best in-class flanker that's able to go at hit scans more reliably. A lot of verticality in these maps in Overwatch 2. And some of the support characters feel like snipers anyway. Reflecting their damage and cooldowns, I think, is really important. Sombra got a buff to her EMP where it now has 3 seconds of ability lockout. That's moved her up in the tier list for me because she does counter a lot of things or play with the dive style. And another reason why I don't rate Tracer so highly for most players, because Sombra's kind of easy, but also has a high skill ceiling. Onto the B tier, I'm gonna say Tracer, despite having a pretty insane on paper buff, still a lot of things hit her hard. And if you're not a top player already, I feel you're not really gonna utilize that damage and are probably gonna easily fall when you shouldn't be. Higher on the tier list than I've had her before is Widowmaker. Mainly because damage is so hard right now that I'm finding Widow to have a lot more potential yet again, despite her being nerfed. Not just on Widow maps, but utilizing the strong supports around her. Zoning out lanes on the map as damage holds a surprising amount of space. There's quite a few tanks now that don't help against that or get their head farmed from it. So in an odd way, I feel comfortable putting her next to Sim and Junkrat, who for similar reasons, despite the game speeding up in some ways, with the right maps or map geometry for them, they can still hold their space. The damage, I'm going to say be careful selecting, not because they're bad, but just because they inherently need help, are Cassidy, Ashe, and Bastion. Bastion especially can't really take solo Q angles anymore. He used to be able to flagrantly feed, essentially, Now there's way too many punishes, including Winston, who zaps through his armor. Bastion needs to play around his team in cover more, making him less applicable. I think Ashe and Cassidy are both very good with the right team around them. Cass needs more peel, and Ashe probably needs a mercy. And then you can shoot these two up to A tier when those conditions are met. Guys, that's everything for the tier list video. Let me know what you think in the comment section down below. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to leave it a like. And don't forget to check out today's video sponsor, Manscaped, and use our promo code OVERWATCH at checkout to get 20% off and free international shipping. If you watched the video this far, that means you probably should subscribe and click the bell icon to actually get notified when our videos come out. That's been it for me. I've been Frito for your Overwatch. I'll see you guys next time.